Our clubhouse was a fortress, built on steel, chrome, and a code that kept outsiders out. But then a genius kid, living in our alley, forced the Black Skulls MC to rewrite every damn rule. The smell of our clubhouse is a very specific perfume. It's a mix of stale beer, old leather, motor oil, and something else. Something like loyalty. It's a scent I've known for 20 years, ever since I patched in with the Black Skulls MC. Now, as president of Chapter 85, that smell is the first thing that hits me in the morning and the last thing I breathe in at night. My world is chrome, steel, and brotherhood. We have a code. We protect our own, we mind our own business, and we don't suffer fools. Our clubhouse is our fortress, and outsiders stay outside. That's just how it is. I first saw the kid on a Tuesday. He was just a shadow at the edge of our parking lot, darting around with the heavy-duty trash bag. He couldn't have been more than 15, maybe 16, skinny as a rail, with big, watchful eyes that took in everything. He was collecting cans. I watched him for a minute from the doorway, my arms crossed over my kuta. He was methodical, efficient. He ignored the Harleys gleaming in the sun, ignored the rumble of engines as a few of my brothers pulled in. He was focused on one thing, the glint of aluminum in the dirt. I grunted and went back inside. Just another stray, trying to get by. Not my problem. But then Tuesday turned into Wednesday, and he was there again. Then Friday. Then the next week. He never came close to the clubhouse, never made eye contact, never asked for a handout. He just worked the perimeter of our property, collecting his cans and then disappearing down the street like a ghost. The other guys started noticing him too. "Who's the shadow bear?" Scrap asked one afternoon, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Scrap's my sergeant-at-arms, hard as coffin nails and twice as mean." "Just a kid collecting cans," I said, not looking up from the engine I was tuning. "Leave him be." And they did. The Black Skulls might look like the end of the world on two wheels, but we have a rule. You don't mess with kids, and you don't mess with old ladies. The boy was in a protected class, at least from us. But as the days bled into weeks, and the crisp autumn air started to get a bitter, wintry edge, I started noticing more things. The kid's jacket was paper thin, the kind you'd wear on a cool spring day. Not when the wind is sharp enough to cut glass. His sneakers had holes in the soles, and his jeans were worn almost white at the knees. But it was his eyes that got me. They were old eyes in a young face, constantly scanning, constantly assessing. The eyes of someone who's learned the hard way that the world isn't a safe place. One evening, we were having a club cookout. Burgers on the grill, beer flowing, the sound of laughter and loud music filling the air. I saw him across the street, huddled by the bus stop, his bag of cans next to him. He was just watching. The smell of the grilling meat was thick in the air, and I saw him swallow, a quick, unconscious movement. Something twisted in my gut. I grabbed a burger, wrapped it in a napkin, and started walking over. The laughter from the clubhouse died down as the guys watched me. A president doesn't just walk off the property for no reason. As I got closer, the kid, Leo, I learned his name was, stiffened up, ready to bolt. "Easy there," I rumbled, my voice probably sounding like rocks grinding together. I held out the burger. "You look hungry." He stared at my hand, at the leather glove and the skull rings, then at the burger. He didn't move. He was wary, like a stray dog that's been kicked one too many times. "I don't take charity," he said, his voice quiet but firm. I was taken aback. Pride. The kid had pride. I respected that. "It ain't charity," I said. "It's a neighborly gesture. We got too much food anyway." I nudged his bag of cans with my boot. "Besides, you keep our lot clean. Consider it payment." He hesitated for a long second. Then slowly he reached out and took the burger. His fingers were freezing cold. "Thanks," he mumbled. And then he was gone, disappearing into the evening gloom before I could say another word. That was the turning point. I couldn't get him out of my head. Where did he go at night? A kid that proud wouldn't be begging, but that didn't mean he had a warm bed to go to. The nights were getting colder, dipping below freezing. The thought of him out there somewhere in that thin jacket started to gnaw at me. The final straw came about a week later. A nasty storm blew in, The kind of cold, driving rain that soaks you to the bone in seconds. It was late, almost 2 a.m. I was locking up the clubhouse, getting ready to head to my bunk upstairs. On a whim, I decided to check the alley behind our building, where we keep the dumpsters, and there he was, curled into a ball behind the biggest dumpster, trying to use a flattened cardboard box as a blanket. He was shivering so hard I could see it from 10 feet away. He was trying to be invisible, trying to survive another night, and he was doing it on my doorstep. My blood ran cold, then hot with a rage I couldn't explain. I turned around, went back inside the clubhouse, and slammed the heavy oak door shut. The sound echoed in the empty hall. I stood there, dripping rainwater on the floor, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles were white. This wasn't just not my problem anymore. This was happening in my territory, under my nose. I walked over to the long oak table where we hold our meetings, what we call church. I picked up the gavel, a heavy polished piece of ironwood, and slammed it down on the table. The sharp crack echoed through the building. It was a summons. An emergency. Within minutes, the guys who bunk at the clubhouse started filtering in, rubbing sleep from their eyes, looking concerned. Scrap, Doc, Reaper, my inner circle, my brothers. They all stared at me, waiting. I took a deep breath, the smell of leather and loyalty filling my lungs. "There's a kid," I started, my voice low and dangerous. "A boy. He's sleeping behind our dumpster. He's got nowhere else to go." Silence. The only sound was the rain lashing against the windows. They all looked at each other, their faces hard and unreadable in the dim light. I was their president. My word was law. But what I was about to suggest, it went against every rule of privacy and separation we lived by. I was about to ask them to bring an outsider, a homeless black kid, into the heart of our fortress. Scrap, ever the hothead, stood up slowly. He cracked his knuckles, a sound like gunshots in the quiet room. He stared me down, his eyes narrowed. "So let me get this straight, Prez," he said, his voice a low growl that promised violence. "You woke us up in the middle of the night because you want to bring a street rat into our house." I let the silence hang in the air, heavy and thick as smoke. Every eye in that room was on me, waiting to see if I'd fold. I met Scrap's glare head-on, my own gaze as hard and unyielding as the chrome on my bike. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't have to. "He's not a street rat, Scrap," I said, my voice a low, gravelly counterpoint to his growl. "He's a kid, and right now he's freezing to death in our alley, on our property, under our watch." I pushed myself away from the table and began to pace slowly, my boots echoing on the concrete floor. "Let me ask you all something. What's our reputation? We're the baddest chapter in the state. No one messes with the Black Skulls. We handle our own problems, and we control our territory. Is that right?" Heads nodded around the table. Reaper, a man who rarely spoke, but whose opinion held immense weight, gave a single, slow nod. "So what does it say about us?" I continued, stopping to lean my knuckles on the table. "If we let a child die of exposure 10 feet from our back door? Not some rival trying to make a statement. A kid. It says we're either blind or we're weak. It says we don't control our own damn turf. It makes us look like a joke." I let that sink in. I wasn't appealing to their pity. I was appealing to their pride. It was the only language they would all understand. I don't give a damn about charity. I give a damn about respect, and letting that boy die out there is a sign of disrespect to ourselves. Scrap was still tense, his jaw working, but the fire in his eyes had dimmed a little. He was processing it. Doc, our club medic and the closest thing we had to a conscience, spoke up. "Prez is right. The temperature's dropping fast. With this rain, hypothermia will set in quick. If he's already shivering that hard, he's in trouble." That was all it took. The unspoken code of the Brotherhood kicked in. You don't question the press in front of the others unless you're prepared to challenge for the gavel, and you don't argue with Doc about matters of life and death. Scrap gave a curt, jerky nod. "What's the plan, then?" "You and Doc with me," I commanded. "The rest of you, get blankets, get the fire in the main hall roaring, and put on a pot of coffee. Strong. We moved with practiced efficiency. I grabbed a heavy wool blanket from the supply closet as we headed for the back door. The moment I pushed it open, the wind and rain howled into the clubhouse, a physical assault of cold. The three of us, giants in leather and denim, stepped out into the storm. The alley was dark, lit only by a single, flickering security light that cast long, dancing shadows. We found him right where I'd left him, a small, shivering heap behind the dumpster. He was barely conscious. His eyes fluttered open as our shadows fell over him, and for a second, raw terror lit them up. He tried to scramble away, to push himself up, but his limbs wouldn't cooperate. He was too cold, too weak. "Easy, son. Easy," Doc said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He knelt, ignoring the filthy puddle he was sinking into. "We're not going to hurt you. We're here to help." I draped the heavy blanket over him, and Scrap moved to my side. Without a word, we both reached down. I took his shoulders, Scrap took his legs, and we lifted him. He weighed next to nothing, like a bird. He was so cold it felt like I was holding a block of ice, even through his wet clothes and the blanket. He whimpered, a small broken sound that cut through the noise of the storm and went straight into my chest. We carried him back inside, kicking the door shut behind us. The warmth of the clubhouse hit us like a physical wall. The other guys were there, waiting. They'd built up the fire, and the main hall was filled with a warm, orange glow. They stared as we brought the boy in, their faces a mixture of curiosity, pity, and suspicion. We laid him down gently on the big leather couch closest to the fireplace. His teeth were chattering uncontrollably. Doc went to work immediately, his professional instincts taking over. "Get these wet clothes off him. Reaper, grab the first aid kit. We need to get his core temperature up, now." We worked quickly, cutting away his soaked jacket and shirt. He was just skin and bones underneath, his ribs starkly visible. As Scrap pulled off the tattered jacket, a book that had been tucked inside slid out and fell to the floor with a soft thud. It was a thick textbook. Advanced Calculus. I stared at it, confused. What was a homeless kid doing with a calculus book? But there was no time to think about it. Doc was pressing his fingers to Leo's neck, checking his pulse. "It's thready," he said, his voice tight with concern. "He's in bad shape." As he continued his assessment, he gently uncurled the boy's right hand, which was clenched into a tight fist. We all expected to see nothing, or maybe a few crumpled dollar bills. But as his fingers relaxed, a small, laminated card fell out onto the couch. It was a student ID card. The photo showed the same kid, Leo, but with a tentative smile, his face a little fuller. I picked it up and read the name, Leo Washington, and then I saw the name of the school printed below it, under a crest of a golden eagle. My blood went cold. It wasn't the local public high school. It was Northgate Preparatory Academy, the most exclusive, most expensive private school in the entire state, a place for the sons of senators and CEOs. I looked from the ID in my hand to the shivering, emaciated boy lying on our couch, and then back again. Nothing made sense. Reaper, who had returned with the first aid kit, was looking over my shoulder. He pointed a scarred finger at the ID. "Northgate," he rasped, his voice like gravel scraping rock. "My cousin's a janitor there. He says the tuition is more than I make in 2 years. That place is for the richest of the rich." He looked at Leo, then back at me, his eyes dark with a question I couldn't answer. "So what the hell is a Northgate kid doing living in our dumpster?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. The roaring fire, the smell of brewing coffee, the hulking figures of my brothers, none of it could dispel the sudden, chilling mystery that had just been dropped in our laps. A Northgate kid. It was like finding a unicorn grazing in our parking lot. The two worlds, ours and his, were not supposed to intersect. Ever. Doc was too focused to care about the puzzle. "Questions later," he barked, pulling more blankets over Leo. "Right now, we keep him from dying." He started rubbing the boy's arms and legs vigorously through the blankets, trying to create friction and warmth. "Scrap, that coffee ready." "Ah, yeah," Scrap grunted, heading for the small kitchen area. He came back with a steaming mug. "Hold his head up," Doc instructed me. I knelt by the couch and gently cradled Leo's head. He was still shivering, but less violently now. His eyes were half open, glazed and unfocused. Doc carefully brought the mug to his lips. "Sip this, kid. It's hot. It'll help." Leo managed a few small sips before his head lolled back against my arm, but it was enough. The warmth, the sugar, the caffeine, it was a lifeline. Over the next hour, we worked on him. We wrapped him in every blanket we had, forced more hot coffee into him, and kept him close to the fire. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the color started to return to his face and lips. The shivering subsided into an occasional tremor. Finally, his breathing evened out, and he fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. The tension in the room eased, but the questions remained. The guys sat around, nursing their own mugs of coffee, their eyes constantly flicking between me and the boy on the couch. The Northgate ID and the calculus book sat on the table like pieces of evidence from an impossible crime scene. "All right, Prez," Scraps said, breaking the silence. "Talk. What do you know about this kid?" I told them everything. How I'd seen him collecting cans for weeks, our brief conversation at the cookout, the pride he had, how he'd refused what he called charity, and finally, finding him behind the dumpster. "That's it," I finished. "That's all I've got. Until that ID fell out of his jacket, I figured he was just another runaway, another kid who fell through the cracks." Reaper picked up the calculus book, flipping through its pages. "There's notes in the margins," he said, his voice low with something that sounded like awe. "Equations, theorems, stuff I ain't never seen before. This kid's smart. Wicked smart." He closed the book and placed it back on the table. "You don't get into Northgate unless you're one of two things: filthy rich or a certified genius who got a full scholarship. And by the looks of his clothes, I'm guessing he ain't filthy rich," Doc added, feeling Leo's forehead. "Fever's gone down. He's stable." The pieces started clicking into place, forming a picture that was both tragic and infuriating. A brilliant kid, smart enough to earn a spot at an elite school, was living on the street freezing to death. Why? Where were his parents? Where was the system that was supposed to protect a child like this? "We can't just throw him back out there," Doc said, voicing what we were all thinking. "No one's throwing him anywhere," I said firmly. I looked around the room at my brothers. These were hard men, men who had seen and done things that would give most people nightmares. But I also saw the flicker of a protective instinct in their eyes. The kid was no longer just an outsider. We had brought him in. We had saved him. By our code, that made him our responsibility, at least for now. "He stays here until he's on his feet. He can have one of the spare bunks upstairs. We'll feed him. When he's ready to talk, we'll find out what the hell is going on. Agreed?" A chorus of grunts and nods was my answer. The decision was made. The Black Skulls MC had just unofficially adopted a stray. Leo slept for almost 18 hours straight. We took turns watching over him. When he finally woke up, he was terrified. He shot upright on the couch, his eyes wide with panic as he took in the circle of huge, bearded, leather-clad bikers surrounding him. He looked like a cornered animal ready to fight or flee. "Easy, son," I said, keeping my voice calm and even. I held up my hands to show I meant no harm. "You're safe. You collapsed out back. We brought you in. My name's Bear." He stared at me, then around the room at the others, his breathing ragged. He was trying to piece it all together. His eyes fell on the table, where his calculus book and ID were sitting. He visibly flinched. We found these," I said, gesturing to the items. "Doc was treating you for hypothermia." His face paled, and a look of pure dread washed over him. He hugged his knees to his chest, making himself smaller. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please don't tell them. Don't tell the school." Now I was completely lost. "Tell them what? That you're a student there. That I—" He trailed off, looking down at the floor, ashamed. "That I'm homeless. They'll take away my scholarship. It's in the contract. Conduct unbecoming of a Northgate student. They have a residency requirement. If they find out I don't have a home, I'll lose everything. It's the only chance I have." The raw desperation in his voice hit me like a punch to the gut. This kid wasn't just fighting to survive the night. He was fighting for his entire future, armed with nothing but a genius-level intellect and a textbook. He was terrified of us, sure, but he was more terrified of losing the one lifeline he had. "No one's telling anyone anything," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "But you need to tell us what happened, Leo. How does a kid like you end up in a dumpster?" It took a while, but the story came tumbling out, a quiet, heartbreaking confession. His mom had died of cancer a year ago. She was a single parent, a housekeeper who had worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. They didn't have much, but they had each other. When she died, he was sent to live with his only living relative, an aunt in the next state. But her boyfriend didn't want another mouth to feed. A few months ago, after a bad fight, the boyfriend had driven Leo to the bus station with $50 and told him not to come back. He'd been on his own ever since, sleeping in shelters when he could, and on the streets when he couldn't. He used public libraries to study and do his homework, all while pretending to his teachers and classmates at Northgate that he was just a normal kid who went home to a warm bed every night. As he spoke, the room grew deadly quiet. I looked at my brothers. Their faces were grim masks of stone, but I saw the fury simmering in their eyes, a fury directed not at the boy, but at a world that could let this happen. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then Scrap, the same man who had called Leo a street rat less than a day ago, stood up. He walked over to the kitchen, came back with a plate piled high with eggs and bacon, and set it down in front of the kid. "Eat," he ordered gruffly. "You're too damn skinny." Leo stared at the food, then at Scrap, his eyes shining with unshed tears. For the first time since we'd found him, a flicker of hope broke through his fear. He picked up a fork and began to eat, slowly at first, then ravenously. We had our answer, but it only created a bigger problem. We couldn't keep him here forever. It was too dangerous, for him and for us. And we couldn't send him back to the street. I was running the options through my head when my phone buzzed. It was a text from a contact I have in the local PD, a guy who owes me a few favors. I'd asked him to run a discreet check on Leo's aunt and her boyfriend. The message was short and chilling. "Bear, your boy's aunt filed a missing persons report on him 2 months ago. Said he ran away, but I dug deeper. The boyfriend has a record, a bad one. Assault, domestic violence, and there's more. Get this. The aunt just cashed out a life insurance policy on Leo's mother. A big one, $250,000. The money was supposed to be held in trust for the kid until he turned 18. I read the text message twice, the words burning themselves into my brain. $250,000. Money that belonged to Leo. Money his aunt had stolen while leaving her own nephew to freeze on the streets. A low growl rumbled in my chest, a primal sound of pure, unadulterated rage. I held up the phone so the guys closest to me could see the screen. Scrap read it, then Reaper, then Doc. The same wave of cold fury washed over their faces. The air in the clubhouse crackled with it. This was no longer just about helping a kid in need. This was about justice. Our kind of justice. Leo looked up from his plate, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He saw the looks on our faces and fear flickered in his eyes again. "What is it? What's wrong?" I put the phone away and knelt in front of him, putting myself on his level. "Leo," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "The money your mom left for you. Your aunt took it." The color drained from his face. The hope that had just begun to dawn in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by a devastating emptiness. It was the final betrayal. The last piece of his old life, the legacy his mother had sacrificed everything for, was gone. He just stared into space, his fork clattering onto the plate. "That's it," Scrap spat, slamming his fist on the oak table so hard the mugs jumped. "We're going for a ride." "No," I said, standing up. The single word cut through the rising tide of violence. Every eye turned to me. "We're not. A dozen bikes roaring up to their door will just get the cops involved, and right now, Leo is legally a runaway. They'll send him into the foster system, and he'll never see that money or Northgate again. We're not going to be thugs. We're going to be smarter." I started pacing, the plan forming in my mind. "Reaper, you said your cousin is a janitor at Northgate. Can you get him to talk to you?" Reaper nodded. "He owes me. What do you need?" I need to know who the headmaster is, his name, his schedule, what he's like. I need to know if he's a reasonable man or just a stuffed suit. Doc, I continued, turning to him, you're our clean man. You've got a respectable background outside of the club. I need you to find me the best probate lawyer in the city, someone who eats guys like that boyfriend for breakfast. And what are you going to do, Prez? Scrap asked, his arms crossed. I stopped pacing and looked at Leo, who was watching me with a fragile, desperate hope. I'm going to pay a visit to the headmaster of Northgate Preparatory Academy. I looked down at my own worn leather kuta, the skull and cross pistons on the back. But not like this. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror in my private room, feeling like I was in a Halloween costume. I was wearing the only suit I owned, one I kept for funerals and court dates. It was black, severe, and stretched tight across my broad shoulders. I'd slicked my hair back and trimmed my beard. I looked less like a biker and more like a mob enforcer, but it would have to do. Doc had found me a shark of a lawyer who, for a hefty consulting fee, was already filing emergency injunctions. Reaper had come through with the intel. Headmaster Thompson was an old-school, no-nonsense guy who valued excellence and integrity above all else. His office hours started at 9 a.m. sharp. I walked into the main hall. Leo was there, dressed in a new set of clothes the guys had bought him. He looked like a different person with a hot meal in his stomach and a full night of sleep. He looked at me in my suit, and his jaw dropped. "Let's go, kid," I said, tossing him the keys to my truck. "You're driving." The ride to Northgate was silent. It was a different universe, all manicured lawns and stately brick buildings. When we walked into the main office, a prim secretary looked up and her polite smile froze when she saw me. I probably looked like I was there to break someone's kneecaps. "We're here to see Headmaster Thompson," I said, my voice calm. "My name is Arthur Bear Hayes. I'm Leo Washington's legal guardian." The lie hung in the air, but the secretary, to her credit, just nodded and picked up the phone. A few minutes later, we were being escorted into a large, wood-paneled office. Headmaster Thompson was a tall, stern-looking man in his 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He stood up and shook my hand, his grip firm. "Mr. Hayes, please have a seat. Leo, I'm glad to see you. We were getting concerned about your absences." We sat down, and I didn't waste any time. I laid it all out. The story of Leo's mom, the aunt, the theft, the homelessness. I didn't mention the biker club or finding him in an alley. I simply said he had come to me for help, as a friend of his late mother. As I spoke, I watched Thompson's face. His stern expression shifted to one of deep concern, then to quiet, righteous anger. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I knew Leo's mother," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "She cleaned my offices for years before she got sick. She spoke of Leo's future with such pride. She told me this school was his destiny." He looked at Leo, and his stern facade crumbled, revealing a deep well of compassion. "To think you have been enduring this hardship alone, while maintaining your grades. Leo, you embody the very spirit of this institution more than any student I have ever had." He turned back to me. "Mr. Hayes, this school does not abandon its own. What do you need?" That was the moment I knew we had won. The full weight of Northgate Preparatory Academy came down like a hammer. Their legal team joined forces with our lawyer. Leo's aunt and her boyfriend didn't stand a chance. Faced with overwhelming evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and child endangerment, they folded instantly. The money was recovered and placed in a secure trust managed by the school. The aunt's boyfriend was arrested on outstanding warrants our lawyer had discovered. The school's board of directors, moved by Leo's story, established a permanent resident scholarship for students in need, with Leo as its first recipient. He was given a room in the school's dormitories, a full meal plan, and a stipend for books and clothes. He had a home. He was safe. A few weeks later, Leo showed up at the clubhouse. He was driving a beat-up but reliable car the lawyer had helped him buy. He looked healthy, confident. He was carrying a large box of pizza and a calculus textbook. He walked right up to me, unafraid. I wanted to say thank you," he said, his voice steady. "All of you. You saved my life." Scrap, who was polishing a piece of chrome, just grunted. "Don't get used to it, kid." but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch into something resembling a smile. "This is for you," Leo said, handing me the textbook. "It's a new edition. I figured, you guys are a brotherhood. You have a code. This book has codes, too. Rules. It's about finding order in the chaos. I thought you might appreciate it." I took the heavy book from his hands. It was an absurd, profound, and perfect gift. I looked from the book to the kid, this brilliant, resilient young man who had stumbled into our world. He wasn't an outsider anymore. He was one of ours. "You're always welcome here, Leo," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Don't be a stranger." He beamed, a genuine, happy smile that reached his eyes. As he left, I looked around our clubhouse. The smell of stale beer, leather, and motor oil was still there. But now, mixed in with it, was something else. The faint, lingering scent of hope. And I knew, right then, that the Brotherhood of the Black Skulls MC had never been stronger.